Did you know that the flying saucers in this movie were built by hand using everyday household materials, and yet they fooled millions of people into thinking they were real? Earth vs. the Flying Saucers came out in 1956, and it scared audiences right out of their seats. People looked up at the sky differently after watching it. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. Number 20. The movie that made people fear the sky. Imagine sitting in a dark movie theater in 1956. The Cold War was happening outside. Newspapers were full of scary stories about nuclear bombs and strange things people were seeing in the sky. Real people were reporting real flying saucer sightings all across America. The government had no clear answers. Everyone was nervous, and nobody quite knew what to believe. Then, into that world of worry and wonder came Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. It landed in theaters like a thunderclap. The movie told the story of a scientist and his wife who discover that alien spaceships are circling the Earth, planning a full invasion. It wasn't just entertainment. For many people sitting in those seats, it felt like a warning. It felt like someone had made a movie about something that could actually happen. Children grabbed their parents' arms. Adults shifted nervously in their chairs. The flying saucers on screen looked real enough to believe. They moved with a strange, slow confidence that made them feel powerful and unstoppable. Director Fred F. Sears understood exactly what his audience was feeling. He knew that fear was already sitting in people's hearts. He just gave that fear a shape. He gave it a spinning silver disc and a laser beam. The movie connected with something deep inside the audience because it used real anxiety as its fuel. People didn't just watch this film, they felt it in their chests. They carried it home with them. They looked up at the night sky on the drive back and wondered. What looked like science fiction to some people felt like a prophecy to others. That tension, that mixture of imagination and genuine dread is what made this movie unforgettable. Fear was the real star of the show. Number 19. Ray Harryhausen. The one-man magic factory. There is one name you cannot say without when you talk about Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, and that name is Ray Harryhausen. Ray was the special effects artist behind all the incredible visuals in this movie. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. Ray didn't have a huge team. He didn't have a giant studio full of helpers and machines. For most of the work, it was essentially just him. One man, one artist. One person responsible for making flying saucers look completely believable on screen. Ray used a technique called dynamation, which he had invented himself. The idea was to combine real filmed footage of actors and real locations with separately created miniature models and creatures. Then he would blend them together so carefully that the final image looked like everything was happening at the same time in the same place. It was like magic. But it was really just patience and skill and thousands of hours of incredibly careful work. Ray would spend days on just a few seconds of finished film. He would move a tiny model just a fraction of an inch, take a photograph, move it again, take another photograph, over and over, frame by frame, until the movement looked smooth and alive. For this movie, he built the flying saucer models himself. He designed them. He painted them. He figured out exactly how they should move and how they should catch the light. Every spinning disc you see in the film passed through Ray Harryhausen's hands. Every crash, every laser blast, every moment of destruction came from his imagination and his dedication. It was one man making movie magic while pretending to be an entire department. What looked like a Hollywood production was often just Ray, alone in a room, working quietly and brilliantly. One man. Infinite imagination. Number 18. The flying saucers were made from hubcaps and cheap materials. Here is a secret that will make you smile every time you watch those saucers float across the screen. The flying saucer models that Ray Harryhausen built were not made from expensive materials. They were not crafted from rare metals or complex engineering parts. Some of them were made using everyday, ordinary objects that you might find in a garage or a hardware store. Hubcaps played a big role. Those round metal discs that sit on car wheels were the perfect shape for a flying saucer. Ray used them as a starting point, then added other pieces, shaping and sculpting until he had something that looked futuristic and threatening. He used plastic, rubber, wire, and various craft materials to build up the details. The spinning motion was created mechanically, with simple motors and rigs that could rotate the models on cue. When you light a spinning metallic object just right, and film it against a dramatic sky, it suddenly looks like something from another world. Ray understood light and shadow better than almost anyone in Hollywood. He knew that the right angle and the right exposure could make a hubcap look like a vehicle from another galaxy. The budget for this entire film was extremely low by Hollywood standards. The producers didn't have much money, and they expected a quick, cheap production. But Ray refused to let the lack of budget show on screen. He stretched every dollar. He improvised constantly. He found creative solutions for every problem. The result was flying saucers that looked convincing enough to genuinely frighten audiences who had never seen anything like them. Cheap materials, brilliant hands, timeless results. What looked like alien technology was born in a very human workshop. Number 17. The movie was shot in only 12 days. You are going to want to sit down for this one, because it is almost impossible to believe. The main live-action filming for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers was completed in approximately 12 days. 12 days, that is barely 2 weeks. That is faster than most school projects take. And yet, this movie produced scenes that audiences talked about for years. The actors, the director, and the crew had to move at an incredible pace. There was no time for long rehearsals. There was no time for multiple attempts at getting a scene perfect. Everyone had to know their lines, hit their marks, and deliver their performance on the first or second try. The director, Fred F. Sears, was known for working quickly and efficiently. He had a reputation in Hollywood for being able to shoot a movie fast without it looking rushed. But even by his standards, this was a sprint. The actors pushed themselves hard. Hugh Marlowe, who played the lead scientist Dr. Russell Marvin, had to stay completely focused every single day. Joan Taylor, who played his wife Carol, had to bring real emotion to scenes that were sometimes shot in a single take. There was no room for a bad day on set. The cameras kept rolling, the pages kept turning, and the story kept moving forward at a relentless pace. And somehow, it all came together. The performances felt real. The story felt urgent. The movie felt like it had been made with care and attention, not like it had been rushed through in less than 2 weeks. That is the magic of a talented team working under pressure. Speed became their creative engine. The clock was ticking, and it made everything better. Number 16. The sound of the saucers changed how sci-fi movies sounded forever. Close your eyes for a moment and think about the sound of a flying saucer. Chances are, whatever you imagined has been influenced by this movie, even if you've never seen it. The sound designers for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers created an eerie, high-pitched electronic humming noise for the alien ships. It was unlike anything audiences had heard before. It felt alien. It felt cold and mechanical and utterly inhuman. The sound was created using electronic instruments and audio manipulation techniques that were quite new at the time. The team experimented with different frequencies and layered sounds on top of each other until they found something that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. When that sound appeared in the theater, people felt it before they could fully explain why it bothered them. It bypassed logic and went straight to instinct. Something about that frequency said danger in a way that words couldn't. The influence of this sound design spread quickly through the science fiction genre. Other movies borrowed similar audio approaches. Other sound designers tried to capture that same feeling of cold, mechanical otherness. The humming saucer sound became a kind of shorthand in movies and television shows for alien technology. Even today, decades later, when you hear a certain kind of electronic whine in a science fiction film, you are hearing a distant echo of the work done for this movie. The sound team didn't know they were creating a template. They were just trying to make their saucers feel real and scary. They succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. What they created in a recording studio became the voice of alien invasion in the imagination of an entire culture. Sound is invisible, but its power never fades. Number 15. Real military footage was mixed with fiction, one of the cleverest tricks in Earth vs. the Flying Saucers is something most viewers never notice while they're watching. The filmmakers used actual real military footage and blended it seamlessly with their fictional story. Real rocket launches, real military vehicles, real scientific equipment. These genuine images were woven into the narrative so skillfully that audiences couldn't tell where reality ended and fiction began. This technique made the movie feel more credible and more frightening. When you see a real rocket on screen, your brain tells you this is true, this is real, this is happening. Then the flying saucer appears in the next shot, And because your brain has already accepted the reality of the scene, the saucer feels real too. It's a psychological trick, and it works beautifully. The production team had access to footage from American military and government sources. The space race was beginning, and there was genuine public interest in rockets and satellites. By using this real footage, the filmmakers connected their science fiction story to the actual scientific world their audience was already curious about. The movie felt less like fantasy and more like a very plausible tomorrow. This blending of real and fictional footage was not unique to this movie, but it was used here with particular skill and purpose. It grounded the story. It made the threat of alien invasion feel like something that could happen next Tuesday rather than something from a distant imagined future. The line between documentary and drama blurred deliberately and brilliantly. What was real and what was made up lived together so comfortably that even careful viewers were fooled. That wasn't a trick. That was storytelling genius. Number 14. The film was based on a real book and real government reports. Earth versus the Flying Saucers was not born entirely from someone's imagination sitting at a desk. It was inspired by a real book written by a man named Major Donald Keyhoe. The book was called Flying Saucers from Outer Space, and it was published in 1953. Major Keyhoe was a former Marine Corps aviator, and he was genuinely convinced that unidentified flying objects were real and that the United States government was hiding what it knew about them. His book caused quite a stir when it came out. It was serious, detailed, and written by someone with real military credentials. It didn't feel like wild guessing. It felt like investigation. When the producers of Earth versus the Flying Saucers decided to make a movie, they used Keyhoe's book as a starting point. They bought the rights to the title and some of the core ideas. Then they hired screenwriters to build a dramatic story around those ideas. The result was a movie that carried the weight of something that felt researched and documented, even though the story itself was fictional. Major Keyhoe was reportedly not completely happy with how his serious investigative work was turned into a monster movie adventure. He had meant his book as a warning and an investigation, not as the basis for entertainment. But the movie brought his ideas to a massive audience that might never have picked up his book. Millions of people who watched the movie never knew they were engaging with real theories from a real military officer who genuinely believed the skies held secrets. Fiction and investigation danced together in this film, and neither one was quite the same afterward. A warning dressed up as entertainment. That combination has always been powerful. Number 13. The Washington, D.C. destruction scenes were incredibly controversial when Earth versus the Flying Saucers shows alien ships attacking and destroying famous landmarks in Washington, D.C. It created a reaction that went far beyond normal movie excitement. Seeing the Washington Monument crumble, seeing the Capitol building destroyed, seeing the symbols of American power and democracy smashed by alien weapons. This was genuinely shocking to audiences in 1956. America was in the middle of the Cold War. The threat of nuclear destruction was real and present in everyone's minds. People practiced hiding under their school desks in case of nuclear attack. Families built bomb shelters in their backyards. The idea of American cities being destroyed was not just a movie fantasy. It was a real fear that people carried every single day. So when this movie showed Washington, D.C. being devastated, it hit audiences in a place that was already tender and scared. Some people found it cathartic, a way to face their fears in the safe darkness of a theater. Others found it deeply disturbing, almost too close to real anxieties to be entertaining. There were discussions about whether it was appropriate to show such destruction, especially of national symbols. The filmmakers argued that showing the stakes clearly was necessary to make the alien threat feel real and serious. You couldn't have a story about Earth fighting for survival if the aliens didn't actually do some convincing damage. Ray Harryhausen's miniature destruction sequences were so well crafted that the falling monuments looked genuinely massive and heavy and real. The controversy only added to the movie's reputation. People talked about it. Debate means attention. Attention means audiences. What caused argument also caused ticket sales. Number 12. Joan Taylor nearly quit before filming even started. Behind the scenes of any movie, there are always stories that never make it onto the screen. One of those stories involves Joan Taylor, the actress who played Carol Marvin, the wife of the scientist hero. Joan was a talented actress who had appeared in several westerns and adventure films before this project came along. When she first read the script for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers, her reaction was not enthusiasm. She had serious doubts about whether science fiction was the right genre for her career. In 1956, science fiction was not the prestigious genre it would later become. Many serious actors considered it beneath them. It was often seen as cheap entertainment, the kind of thing made quickly and forgotten quickly. Joan was worried about being associated with a movie that might damage her reputation rather than build it. She had conversations with her agent and spent time weighing her options. There was genuine uncertainty about whether she would sign on at all. What changed her mind was the script itself when she read it more carefully. She noticed that Carol Marvin was not just a helpless character waiting to be rescued. Carol was intelligent. She contributed to solving problems. She had real conversations and real emotions and real agency in the story. For a science fiction movie of that era, that was actually quite progressive. Women in these films were often simply decorations or victims. Carol was neither. Joan recognized that and decided the role was worth taking. She committed fully and delivered a performance that gave the movie genuine warmth and human feeling. Her hesitation could have lost the film its heart. Her decision to stay gave it one. One phone call changed everything. Number 11. The script was written in under 3 weeks if the shooting schedule was remarkably fast. The writing of the script was equally breathtaking in its speed. The screenplay for Earth vs. the Flying Saucers was written in a very short amount of time, reportedly under 3 weeks from beginning to final draft. The writers, Kurt Siodmak and Bernard Gordon, were brought in to create a story that could be made quickly and cheaply while still delivering excitement and drama. Kurt Siodmak was a highly experienced science fiction and horror writer who had worked on many films before this one. He knew how to build tension efficiently. He understood story structure deeply and could work at speed without losing quality. Bernard Gordon was also experienced and contributed significantly to shaping the final script. Writing a screenplay in 3 weeks is an enormous challenge. You have to build characters that audiences care about. You have to create a believable threat. You have to structure action sequences that are exciting to read and possible to film. You have to manage pacing so the story never drags. All of that in less than a month. The writers made choices that were bold and smart. They kept the human story at the center, making sure that the alien invasion felt personal rather than abstract. The relationship between Dr. Russell Marvin and his wife Carol gave audiences someone to root for, someone whose survival felt important beyond just the fate of the world. Without those personal stakes, the alien threat would have felt distant and cold. The fast writing forced clarity. There was no time for unnecessary scenes or confusing subplots. Everything had to earn its place. Speed sometimes is the best editor. The clock pushed the story into its best possible shape. Number 10. Ray Harryhausen worked on the effects for over a year after filming finished. While the actors finished their work in about 12 days and went home, Ray Harryhausen's work was just beginning. After the live-action filming was complete, Ray spent well over a year working on the special effects. More than a year of careful, painstaking, frame-by-frame animation and compositing to bring the flying saucers to life. This is an extraordinary fact when you think about the mathematics of it. 12 days to film the actors, over a year to make the saucers real. The flying saucers were the stars of the film in many ways, and every moment they appeared on screen represented hours of invisible labor by one dedicated artist. Ray would take the footage of the actors and the real locations and then carefully work out how to place his models into that footage. He had to match the lighting exactly. He had to match the scale perfectly. He had to make sure that when an actor looked up at the sky and appeared frightened, the saucer that would eventually be added into the shot was in exactly the right position to make that reaction believable. This kind of work requires extraordinary patience. It requires the ability to see the finished result in your imagination while working on tiny, isolated pieces of it. Ray described his process as being like a painter who works on one small section of a canvas at a time, trusting that when all the pieces come together, the whole picture will make sense. He trusted his vision completely, and his vision was right. The year of invisible work became the magic that audiences saw and marveled at. Nobody knew they were watching a year of someone's life in every few seconds of flying saucer footage. That wasn't speed. That was love. Number 9. The film inspired a generation of future filmmakers. The reach of Earth versus the flying saucers extended far beyond the audiences who watched it in 1956. It also reached a generation of young people who would grow up to become some of the most influential filmmakers in history. Steven Spielberg has spoken about his love of science fiction films from this era. George Lucas has discussed how these movies shaped his imagination. Tim Burton, Joe Dante, and many others grew up watching these films and carrying their images and their sense of wonder into their own work. When you watch the alien invasion sequences in Independence Day from 1996, you are watching a movie that is in conscious conversation with Earth versus the flying saucers. The director Roland Emmerich and producer Dean Devlin were both aware of and inspired by the classic films of the 1950s. The spinning saucers, the military response, the destruction of famous landmarks, these elements echo directly from the earlier film. Ray Harryhausen himself became a legendary figure for an entire generation of effects artists and filmmakers. His name was spoken with reverence. His techniques were studied and admired. When Peter Jackson made his Lord of the Rings films, he brought together a team of visual effects artists, many of whom cited Harryhausen as their inspiration and their hero. The ripples of this one modest, quickly made science fiction movie from 1956 spread outward through decades of cinema. Every generation of filmmakers encountered it, was moved by it, and carried something from it forward. A small stone dropped in 1956. The waves are still moving. Inspiration never expires. Number 8. The alien communication device scene was based on real science. In one of the most interesting scenes in Earth versus the flying saucers, the aliens use a special device to communicate with humans by slowing down recorded messages so they can be understood. The filmmakers worked with this idea because it was grounded in real scientific thinking about how communication across vast distances might work. In the 1950s, scientists were genuinely thinking about the challenges of communication with hypothetical extraterrestrial beings. How would language work across species? How would messages be transmitted and received? The film's screenwriters had done some research into these ideas and incorporated them into the story. The communication device in the movie feels more grounded and thoughtful than many sci-fi films of the era, which often just had aliens speaking perfect English for no explained reason. By giving the aliens a communication mechanism that required effort and technology to decode, the film made the encounter feel more real and more interesting. It suggested that first contact would not be simple or easy. It would require patience, intelligence, and technology on both sides. For audiences in 1956 who were watching the real space race beginning and real scientists talking seriously about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe, this felt relevant and genuine. The movie was engaging with real questions, not just making things up for excitement. Science and story worked together to create something that felt worthy of genuine thought. That respect for the audience's intelligence lifted the film above many of its competitors. Imagination and science, holding hands quietly. That combination always makes something worth remembering. Number 7. The movie was a massive box office success despite its tiny budget. Earth versus the flying saucers was made for a very small amount of money. The exact budget figures vary depending on the source, but it was unquestionably a low-budget production by any Hollywood standard. The producers expected it to do reasonably well with the science fiction audience, which was enthusiastic and loyal. What they did not fully expect was the scale of its success. The film earned many times its production cost at the box office. Audiences came in huge numbers. The combination of timely subject matter, exciting visuals, and genuine emotional storytelling resonated with a public that was hungry for exactly this kind of experience. The movie played in theaters across America and internationally. It was re-released multiple times over the following years because audiences kept wanting to see it. This kind of box office performance transformed the careers of everyone involved and confirmed that science fiction was a commercially powerful genre worth taking seriously. For producers, it proved that you didn't need enormous sums of money to make an enormous impression. You needed the right idea at the right moment with the right talent. All three of those things came together in this film. The financial success also had a broader effect on Hollywood. It encouraged other studios and producers to invest in science fiction stories. It helped open the door for more ambitious science fiction productions in the years that followed. A small investment in one movie helped expand an entire genre. The money told the story clearly. Sometimes a tiny budget is the best creative challenge a film can have. Limits made them inventive, and invention made them rich. Number 6. Hugh Marlowe brought unexpected depth to the scientist hero. The central human character in Earth versus the Flying Saucers is Dr. Russell Marvin, a scientist working on a satellite program who becomes Earth's unlikely hero when the alien invasion begins. Hugh Marlowe played this character, and he brought something to the role that the script didn't fully demand, but the movie absolutely needed. He brought doubt. He brought vulnerability. He brought the sense of a real person dealing with something completely beyond his experience or training. In many science fiction films of the era, the scientist hero was a confident, almost superhuman figure who always knew the right answer. Hugh Marlowe made Russell Marvin feel genuinely uncertain and frightened at times. He made him human. There are moments in the film where Marlowe's performance communicates something quite subtle. A man who is making decisions he is not sure about, carrying the weight of responsibility for the entire planet on shoulders that were built for laboratory work, not warfare. That humanity made the story feel real. When audiences saw Marlowe's fear, they felt their own fear was validated. When they saw his determination despite that fear, they felt something like courage themselves. Hugh Marlowe was a stage-trained actor with considerable experience, and he used all of that training to give this relatively modest science fiction film a beating heart. He didn't phone in his performance because the genre was considered low prestige. He showed up completely and gave everything the role needed. That professionalism elevated every scene he was in. Courage on screen always starts with an actor who actually shows up. Hugh Marlowe showed up completely. Number 5. The destruction of Washington was created using miniatures smaller than you'd expect the sequences in Earth versus the Flying Saucers showing famous Washington, D.C. Landmarks being destroyed are among the most memorable images in 1950s science fiction cinema. The Washington Monument shattering, buildings crumbling, chaos in the streets of the American capital. These images are powerful, dramatic, and convincing. But here is what makes them extraordinary. The models used to create these destruction sequences were much smaller than you might imagine. Ray Harryhausen built miniature versions of these famous structures, but the budget constraints meant these miniatures were not large, elaborate models. They were relatively small and simple. Making something small look massive and real on film is an art form that requires deep understanding of physics, light, and camera behavior. Ray knew that when something falls and breaks, the speed and the sound and the texture of the debris all communicate scale. A small model falling quickly looks like a toy. The same model falling at the right speed, with the right debris and the right camera angle and the right lighting, can look like a building. He controlled all of these variables with extraordinary precision. He filmed things at specific speeds that, when played back at normal speed, made the falling miniatures look heavy and massive. He used materials that broke and crumbled convincingly. He lit everything to match the rest of the scene. The result was destruction that felt genuinely epic, created from materials and models that would fit on a large dining table. Enormous impact, tiny origin. What felt like the end of the world was built in a small workshop by careful, patient hands. Number 4. The film predicted real satellite technology before it existed. Earth versus the Flying Saucers is set against the backdrop of an American program to launch satellites into orbit. Dr. Russell Marvin is working on exactly this kind of project when the alien invasion interrupts everything. Here's the remarkable thing about this. The movie was released in 1956. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite, in 1957. The American satellite program that the movie depicted was fiction when it was written and filmed. Within 1 year of the movie's release, it had become reality. Audiences who had watched the film and perhaps thought the satellite idea was far-fetched science fiction suddenly found themselves reading about real satellites in real newspapers. The film had been more prophetic than anyone intended. The screenwriters had been paying attention to real scientific developments and incorporated them into the story, but the speed at which reality caught up with the fiction was startling. This gave the movie a strange second life. People went back to see it or remembered it differently once real satellites were orbiting the Earth. The science in the film suddenly felt less like imagination and more like foresight. This blurring of the line between science fiction and scientific fact is one of the things that makes the film feel more significant than a simple, low-budget monster movie. It was in conversation with the real world, and the real world responded by doing what the movie had imagined. Science fiction told the truth before the scientists finished their work. Sometimes stories know things before facts are ready to catch up. This film knew, and then the world proved it right. Number 3. The film had a surprising hidden message about communication and peace when you watch Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. As a simple action movie, you see flying saucers, explosions, and a scientist saving the world. But there is a layer underneath the excitement that many viewers miss. The film has a quiet, serious message about communication, misunderstanding, and the consequences of failing to listen. In the movie, the initial contact between the aliens and humans goes wrong, partly because of failures of communication. Signals are missed. Messages are misunderstood. Meetings turn violent before understanding can happen. The aliens, it turns out, are not simply evil. They have their own reasons for what they are doing. The film suggests, gently but clearly, that the catastrophe might have been avoided if both sides had been more patient, more willing to listen, more committed to understanding each other before reaching for weapons. In 1956, with the Cold War at its most tense and the United States and Soviet Union locked in a standoff based on mutual fear and misunderstanding, this message was not abstract. It was directly relevant to the real political world. The alien invasion was a metaphor that careful viewers could read. The enemy that seems purely evil might have understandable motivations. The war that seems inevitable might be the result of failures in communication rather than genuinely incompatible goals. The filmmakers may not have planned this message as deliberately as it reads today, but it is there. Art often says more than its makers consciously intended. The film whispered something true about humanity into the middle of all its explosions. Listen carefully, it said, before the shooting starts. That message never gets old. Number 2. Ray Harryhausen considered this film among his most personally satisfying work. Ray Harryhausen worked on dozens of films throughout his extraordinary career. He created fantastic creatures and impossible worlds for movie after movie, decade after decade. He worked on films with larger budgets and longer schedules. He created work that won more immediate recognition and praise. But in interviews given later in his life, Ray often spoke about Earth vs. the Flying Saucers with particular warmth and satisfaction. The reason, he explained, was the creative freedom he was given. Because the budget was small and the schedule was tight, nobody was looking over his shoulder constantly. Nobody was second-guessing his decisions or demanding changes to his methods. He was trusted to solve the visual problems in whatever way he thought was best. That freedom allowed him to be fully creative in a way that bigger, more expensive productions sometimes prevented. He made decisions quickly and stuck to them. He experimented when he wanted to and followed his instincts without having to write long justification documents or attend endless meetings. The flying saucers in this film reflect his pure creative vision more than almost any other work in his filmography. Every design choice, every movement, every way the light catches the spinning metal of the saucer, that was Ray, unfiltered and uninterrupted. He was proud of what he had achieved with so little. In fact, the limitations had pushed him to be more creative, not less. The small budget had forced his imagination to work harder and find better solutions. He learned something important about himself during this production. Constraints are not the enemy of creativity. Sometimes they are its greatest teacher. Ray's best self came out when the walls were closest. Number 1. The film's legacy outlasted every expectation and changed science fiction forever. We have arrived at the most important fact of all, and it might be the most surprising one. Nobody involved in making Earth vs. the Flying Saucers in 1956 thought they were making a classic. Nobody imagined that people would still be watching, studying, and celebrating this film decades into the future. They were making a quick, exciting science fiction movie for audiences who wanted to be thrilled and scared on a Saturday afternoon. They did their jobs well, and then they expected the movie to disappear, as most movies do, into the comfortable fog of the past. That is not what happened. Earth versus the Flying Saucers survived. It found new audiences in each generation. It was shown on television when studios began licensing their old films to TV networks, and millions of people who hadn't seen it in theaters discovered it on their living room screens. It inspired filmmakers who then made films that inspired other filmmakers. It appeared on lists of influential science fiction films. It was studied in film schools. Ray Harryhausen's work on this film became part of the curriculum for visual effects artists around the world. The spinning saucers became cultural icons. The images entered the shared imagination of a culture and never fully left. When Independence Day came out in 1996 and audiences cheered at alien saucers being destroyed over Washington, D.C., they were responding to an image that Earth versus the Flying Saucers had planted in the collective memory 40 years earlier. Legacy is not always planned. It is sometimes simply the result of doing something with genuine care and honest skill. The people who made this film cared, and caring, it turns out, is something audiences can always feel, no matter how many years pass. A small movie, an endless legacy. The sky was never quite the same. Bonus fact, a secret session that saved the Washington scenes. There is one story about the making of Earth versus the Flying Saucers that almost nobody tells, and it involves a late-night creative session that nearly didn't happen. As Ray Harryhausen worked through his year-long effects process, he reached a point where the Washington, D.C. destruction sequences were not working. The miniature buildings were falling in a way that looked wrong. The scale felt off. The debris moved too quickly and revealed the truth about how small the models actually were. Ray was frustrated. The budget was gone. There was no money to rebuild the models or start over. There was no time to completely redo the sequences. He had to solve the problem with what he had, using only his skill and his problem-solving mind. He called in a trusted colleague, and the two of them spent an entire night in the studio, alone with the models and the camera equipment, running tests. They tried different camera speeds. They tried different lighting setups. They moved the camera closer, then farther away. They adjusted the composition of each shot so that the eye was drawn to the drama of the falling structure rather than the details that would betray its small scale. They experimented with materials on the ground beneath the falling models to change how the debris landed and scattered, slowly, through hours of quiet experimentation in an empty studio in the middle of the night. The sequences began to work. The buildings began to look like real buildings. The destruction began to feel like real destruction. By the time morning came and the rest of the crew arrived, Ray had solved the problem. He had found the answers not through money or resources, but through stubbornness, creativity, and the willingness to stay in the room until the solution appeared. Nobody ever knew about that night session. Nobody wrote about it in the studio records. It existed only in Ray's memory and the memory of his colleague. But the proof of that night is visible in every second of those Washington destruction scenes. Every stone that falls correctly. Every building that crumbles convincingly. Every moment of destruction that makes the audience lean forward in their seat, that was born in a secret, sleepless night between two artists who refused to give up. No fanfare, no recognition, just two people in a room working until they got it right. Old tools, new magic. Earth versus the Flying Saucers is more than a movie about alien invasion. It is a story about human beings doing extraordinary things with ordinary means. It is about a handful of artists and storytellers who looked up at a sky full of Cold War anxiety and turned their fear into imagination. They built flying saucers from hubcaps and dreams. They filmed a world-ending disaster in 12 days with a crew smaller than most school plays. They created images that lasted longer than anyone expected and inspired filmmakers who went on to change the world of cinema. Ray Harryhausen sat alone in his workshop for over a year, moving tiny objects a fraction of an inch at a time, and in doing so, he created magic that millions of eyes have witnessed and countless hearts have felt. That is a kind of quiet heroism that doesn't get celebrated enough. The people behind the camera, the artists working in small studios, the writers typing at speed, the actors showing up fully for stories they weren't sure anyone would remember. They all mattered. Their work mattered, and it still does. So the next time you look up at the sky and see something that makes you wonder, remember that wondering is where all the great stories begin. Stay curious, stay creative, stay amazed. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.